join in. We have 150 participants.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. As we get ready to start our businesses next week, we'll all get back to our offices, factories, or stores and be faced with the question, now what? Where do we go from here? What's the next step for all our businesses? Our industry in some ways was already facing a little bit of a challenge before this crisis came about. So there was already something that needed to be changed. And there's something like a saying that I like: if you try the same thing again and again, the result may not be different. So often we find ourselves complaining and comparing ourselves to clothes and accessory brands and wonder why consumers, aren't so value conscious when they're buying these products. But if one were to look at the consumer experience beyond just the product, it would give you a different perception or realization. Our panelists today, in that sense, are the enlightened ones. They've all decided to take a road less traveled and have created organizations that have defied the norms in some ways. Our first one is Ankit Mehta. He's a co-founder of Walking Tree. Walking Tree has curated and created consumer-driven jewelry retail brands which are relatable and relevant, while focusing equally as much on design engineering and product design. His other initiatives are Imaginarium, India's largest 3D printing company, and 10x Brand Capital, which is an incubator of young brands. His retail brands span across Asia, Europe, China, and he has two other businesses, Fab Jewels and Fab Unrounds, which are B2B businesses in India and China. In summary, Ankit has set a benchmark for all of us to follow, not only in terms of his business, but also his approach towards everything around him. I've had the pleasure of working with him in a committee, and the rare occasion that he shows up, his clarity of thought is exemplary. Harshad Ajumal, everyone knows Harshad. He's the original story weaver and fashion-forward jeweler from our industry. He's almost too sophisticated to be a jeweler. A goldsmith, an artist who has since 1990 been selling his avant-garde designs globally through his brands H. Ajumal and H. Craft. Prior to this, he was a partner at Sama. Harshad has never refused to be part of any industry event that I've invited him to, and has always been more than happy to share his knowledge and vision with the industry. Finally, we have Zora, who is an alumni of the Istituto Marangoni of Italy with a master's in fashion accessories. She is also a product design grad from NID, National Institute of Design. She has a wealth of experience from having worked with, apprenticed for Viren Bhagat, to doing projects for Xenia, Hugo Boss, World Gold Council, Swarovski. These are just a few. I've also worked with her personally, and her approach to design exemplifies path-breaking trends in the fashion and jewelry industry. So, our topic today is tech, storytelling, and merchandising, and how they've become increasingly relevant to our business today. I'm going to start with asking Ankit the first question. Ankit, how has tech allowed designers, manufacturers, and brands to experiment with product development and marketing? I mean, because you are at both ends. You've got Imaginarium, which is doing phenomenal things with engineering and prototyping, and then you've got Her Story and all your retail businesses and your wholesale business, and you're using tech extensively in all areas. So, if it's possible, can you give us a sense of how this has allowed you to how tech has really enabled all of this?
I think how technology can change our lives, we've all learned in the last 2 months, because everybody I know now, even including my grandmom, is embracing technology. So tech in the world of jewelry, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, has really, if you break the two and if you take product development, and especially for product development, tech has really played a role. Through the use of, let's say, CAD technologies, advanced visualization technologies, 3D printing, and so on. I think product development has now become faster. It's become where you can test your products quickly. You can bring a lot more products to market, let's say, than you could 5-10 years back. And we can really see that because across the world, when you see retailers and brands, today it's all about new. And it's about every month, every day, every week, how many new things are you able to bring to market? The customer is able to try new things and quickly move on. So I think from a product development point of view, and especially through Imaginarium, we have explored how technology can really, really push product development forward. Designers can today sit and craft, sort of imagine something, and literally in a few hours have it in their hands, show it to 5 people, get feedback and adapt. So to make that entire process more, earlier it used to be completely in a vacuum, where you do designs, 6 months later you bring them to market. Today that entire process has become iterative. So that's on product development. On marketing, I think we all know that today technology is the only way we can reach out to our customers by allowing them to engage online and social media, through artificial, augmented reality, so on and so forth. So I think even from a marketing standpoint, and I think on the marketing front, we may have seen only some of the advantages so far, but in a post-COVID world, I think we're going to see a huge advantage or a huge push up to the marketing efforts of every brand on the back of technology. So I really think that it's made a huge impact.
Life cycle is reduced. I mean, the whole from development to market, you would say it's reduced by, in percentage terms, say in terms of time, what was it earlier and over the last year or two, how much do you think?
I think if we count it not in a year or two, but maybe over 5 years, I think whatever time it would take to bring a product to market, finally, when you're ready to launch it and put marketing dollars behind it, I think that time is easily reduced by more than half, like maybe even 70% lower than what it used to take, let's say 5 years back, because today the entire cycle can go much faster.
So, Harshad, I'm going to ask you, because you are a handmade, you've always been about handmade and stuff like that. And tech can, kind of flatten everything globally, as in it can democratize manufacturing. Do you think the very concept of handcrafted jewelry can really get threatened because of tech? And does it all, as in when I say tech, I mean prototyping, rapid production. And does it also threaten India's potential as a jewelry manufacturing hub?
Okay, so that's a little gray area, I would say, so to speak. I mean, being predominantly a handcrafted jeweler, that doesn't mean we don't use technology or services from Imaginarium and things like that. It's about balancing the two together and putting a narrative out over there. And the narrative out over there should speak about your collections, about what you're creating and who you're selling to. So we definitely use services like Imaginarium offers, CAD, CAM, things like that. And a lot of it is to do with experimentation at our end. But that doesn't mean we make everything mechanized or bulk or anything like that. For single, even one-off pieces, even for our bespoke clients, we do so much of wax modeling and CAD CAM work to show them models and samples and things like that before taking it forward. Now again, that balance of technology, how to give in a high-end feel for handmade jewelry. I think handmade jewelry, so to speak, is not something to get threatened by technology or anything. It's the eventual product that we put out there should not feel mass market. Because at least someone like me, or even a mid to high level jewelry brand that's coming out there, the product generally feels just too much of technology over there. So how do we balance off things like that? Maybe using wax setting to a certain extent, but not in the whole product. Still hand polishing, I think, makes a little bit of difference in the end product and things like that. So CAD, I would definitely say, is a plus point for us. And we must keep using that ahead as we go ahead and absorb the technology that's coming. But we shouldn't lose the feel of the piece, So where I'm concerned is I look at the design and I look at a piece of mine at the design stage, and then I decide how to produce it. I might go in for full wax carving. I might make a silver model. I might use CAD technology. So it's again, for me, how I perceive that design, how I think it'll translate out, what best practice I could use to produce that piece of jewelry. So with technology coming in, I don't think handcrafting should be threatened on a front over there. I think we should balance it, use it, and the end product that we churn out over there shouldn't give that mass market feel. That's what I just want to say. Yeah.
Let's not say mass market is not a good feel, but what you're saying is that you can kind of use tech in a way where it can still give you that premiumness.
Absolutely. The end product. How does the end product feel?
And we only produced, we only considered CAD/CAM for products that would be mass produced. Now, even a single use has become quite efficient. So, having said that, what you're saying is that you can still continue to demand a premium for product that is, say, using technology, but can be presented in a different way.
I think this is where design comes into play a lot, and the story, that what we are talking about today, the topic about narrative. So I'll leave you to take that forward. That's very important.
Before we go there, I wanted to ask Zora her opinion on, is there any way that we can use technology while producing and engineering something, make it mass market, let it be mass market, but still make it seem premium? Tech allows us to mass produce something complicated and yet seem kind of premiumish. So are there any areas that you think, can really spur this?
Yeah, I mean, I really do feel that technology has kind of given designers and manufacturers an added advantage in terms of manufacturing products, even if it's for a mass market, to give it that premium look and feel. There's, like you said, there's a fine balance that you can create between technology and doing handcrafted items, and you can still use technology to kind of help you in those areas. What Imaginarium does, like for example, where you 3D print products, so you have designs that you create, which could be premium in their look and feel or whatever materials that you use. The turnaround time on that is much faster, and you're able to produce, you're able to produce prototypes which you can work on, which you can engineer to make sure that, anything that you want to tweak gets done faster. And then you are able to produce, once you create the final CAD file that's going to be printed and that will be worked on, once you get to that point, you can actually, there is no real limit on the number of pieces that you can create. So you can keep printing those pieces and making it. So yeah, it does work for a mass market. And at the same time, it will still have that premium look and feel, just because of the faster turnaround times and the kind of input that you can have in terms of, there's some things that could maybe not be done by hand. And so you could possibly do that, some processes which may be more difficult to do by hand or may take much longer to do by hand, this shortens that kind of time span. So I think in a way, yes, it has helped a lot in terms of, getting designs, premium designs also to mass markets.
All right. So, once the product is in the market, there's obviously a lot more that now is necessary, as we all know, to kind of sell product. It's not only just producing it and putting it out there. Storytelling, building narratives around pieces has become a critical part, and all of you are quite adept at that. Harshad, how much effort or resource do you put into building a narrative around your product and collections? You could tell me in terms of time investment, if there's a quantitative kind of financial number you can give, just as in terms of any percentage, how much time do you actually put in?
Again, it's a little vague right now in the sense because if we could have a Pret collection, then I don't put that much time into the narrative maybe as I would do with a high bespoke collection or high jewelry line that we do in general. But in terms of inspiration, the way it works is it's a whole team effort that goes in over there. To start with, like me being the creative head, I would come up with a whole bunch of ideas and they just keep churning out, and my team sort of controls me and keeps it at a limit, and just, you know, because we can't realize everything. And before we realize, even take it to the next step, there is a lot of work that goes in post ideating. Once we ideate, then we go on to something like a mood board where it's a mix of ideas, of words and pictures that are sort of speak about the collection and things like that. At that stage, when we involve our design team and our illustrators, we also involve our marketing team out there to see that, is this a story that could appeal to the consumer out there or whoever we are targeting? Maybe I'm working on a project as a consultant, and the client over there has said, this is my market, these are my demographics, what can you create for us as an idea? So the ideas come in over there. How do we realize it and take it to the next level? It's a whole bunch of things over there. Once you have the story in place, can the story speak to your target audience? It's very important over there. So the mood board, the words, the documents, the creation over there, the rough sketches that we do at this stage before we get onto CAD and seeing in 3D over there.
Sorry, Harshad, I think Harshad is... Your connection kind of blipped a little further.
Okay, you can hear now?
Yeah.
Okay. So coming back to it, it's a whole team effort out there that, you know, post ideating, post creating the idea, the marketing team is involved to create a storyline which we could, you know, use for social media, for our photo shoots, all that sort of thing. And we also see, is this collection realistic to take forward? And a lot of times we dump the ideas out over there. We don't even take it forward over there. We also involve our purchase department, our stone cutters, in sample cutting. We take out wax pieces and give them for sample cutting. Certain facets works at certain...
I think we've...
Oh, you lost again? We lost you. Can you hear that?
Now we can, yeah.
Okay. I would say in general, a high jewelry collection takes us anywhere from ideating to actually putting the product out there 3 to 6 months. I would say it takes 3 to 6 months to get out over there. But a Pret line, we sort of narrow the narrative up a little bit. We make it a little shorter, a little easier, and maybe a little bit more faster for the consumer to absorb, not so detailed. I would say that takes us maybe from start to finish, maybe around 3 to 4 months, 3.5 months to get out there. Yeah.
So you are involving your stone cutters, the designers, the merchandisers, you're creating this whole mood board, then kind of doing a test run before to kind of visualize how it would look like when it goes to market.
Right.
So the story leads the kind of product, and then you have the final product. There may be times when, because of commercial and commercial compulsions, you know, when manufacturers or companies need to create the product first without a storyline, because there are, you know, pricing considerations or, you know, market-led, you know, inputs. Ankit, in that case, do you think the story always needs to come? I mean, I know that you have beyond designers and stone cutters and merchandisers, you have poets and philosophers in your office to help you weave stories. But can you reverse engineer a story? Is it possible? Is it, you know, is there an ethical kind of boundary here where, you know, one needs to only come up with the story first, or you know, can it be? You know, India's pretty good at reverse engineering, so.
Yeah, this is it's funny you say this, because always you try to go create an inspiration. We have a team of people who speak to real people, ask them their stories. So we run blogs internally which have stories of people, emotions, things that they really want to share. And from that, we give the design team inspirations. But more often than not, we also allow the design team to just freely work on ideas and build an idea bank. And if then an idea bank there's an idea in that bank which is really, really exciting, then we definitely have no qualms in admitting that we do reverse engineer, because even in that there's a story, right? Maybe a designer thought of a certain symbol that could be turned into a fantastic product. Then that symbol can always connect back into a concept or a story. So in reality, as much as you try, if you want to end up with a very, very exciting product, then you have to give the freedom to the process to happen in whichever direction. It will not always happen so linearly. And we allow for that freedom. We allow for that freedom so that creativity can flourish.
So it's okay as long as when it hits market, it all seems seamless.
Yeah, for sure.
So, obviously we have a domestic industry and an export industry. A lot of people are attempting to build businesses that can service an international customer. Zora, what kind of stories do you think Indian brands, build that are globally kind of relevant? Do they always have to be rooted in Indian culture, or do you think we'll ever have, a time when, or do you think we have the potential to be part of pop culture? Let's say, for example, do Indian brands, or Indian businesses, can they do that? And if so, what's a small kit that every kind of business should have to do this? A small merchandising, what are the components of that kind of merchandising kit?
So when it comes to Indian brands, I don't think it's necessary that you always have to have your stories rooted in Indian culture or Indian, something to do with Indian techniques or culture. I think that Indian brands do have the opportunity to be part of a broader sort of pop culture, like you mentioned, because it's not like this. There are designers all over the world. There are brands all over the world, and there are brands from various countries that still fit into those kind of pop culture aesthetics, or they make collections that are internationally acceptable. It's different if you take, if you want to take inspiration from India as such and create a collection that is, internationally viable, depending on what market you're targeting, or what market you're focusing on. But I think it's really open to the design team or the brand that is making these collections. The idea at the end of the day, even when you're merchandising, or how your merchandising plan should be, is that it should accentuate the DNA characteristics of your brand. So you have to know your customer. Even if you want to broaden that scope, or just broaden your scope of customers, you have to understand their behavior, understand how they think. Customers do like brand stories, or brands where they can see reflections of themselves. So it's very important.
Just when you're saying brands, it doesn't necessarily have to be a brand. It could also be
an individual designer. It could be anybody. But when you're selling to anyone, for example, you could be a retailer, you could be a brand, you could be a designer individually. When you have to get across to whoever you want to get across to, your customer, it becomes a more personal experience when they can see a reflection of themselves. A lot of individual designers or people or brands nowadays are looking to elevate the experience of merchandising, or even visual merchandising, where they're trying to create something more experiential and innovative. What maybe worked 5 years ago will not work today. What works today, again, because of the change in, the socio-political climate of the industry, will not work maybe 5 years from now. So it's important to constantly innovate. It's important to have that kind of foresight. So it's important that it's convenient for the customer, as well as it's a seamless customer journey. So the way you build your narrative is what will distinguish you from anyone else or any other brand. It has to be effortless. And now, considering because we're talking about tech as well, and we're moving into an age where augmented reality and virtual reality are becoming more and more part of our lives, there are a lot of brands that are implementing this into either their online platforms or their retail brick and mortar stores. So it's more of an interactive environment for a customer where they feel like they're part of something, rather than it's just you selling something to them and they buy it and go home. Because most people, at least 65% of people in recent studies respond to visual displays. You know, the way you curate your content, the way that your visual language is. So that is important.
So can a manufacturer, because we still don't have Indian brands really, we have very few, global brands coming out of India, but for a manufacturer, can a manufacturer actually prepare a kit for an international customer? And when I say customer, I mean a retailer, which has all these elements, the stories that, Harshad spoke about, some of the collaterals for, merchandising. So Ankit, when you are kind of working with retailers, can you, for a small business, can you give like a 3 or 5 critical components or elements that one should have in, besides product in their kind of offering, that would make it easier for a retailer to just kind of take that whole thing, put it in the showcase, or create a WhatsApp kind of imagery for them. I don't know what would be the 3 or 5 most important components of that entire kit that a retailer could use? Because most of our members would be manufacturers, not brands yet.
So I think not just for an international retailer or an international chain, but even in a country like India, with retailers in India, we do that. I think content, which is basically the inspiration of the collection, photography, materials that can go into social media, materials that can go into print media, materials that can build like books and everything in this shop. So content would be one. The visual merchandising, which is your entire display system, because especially in India, abroad there is a good standard of sort of visual merchandising, but in India, definitely we put a little less effort into presenting a product. So visual merchandising kit, which would include the display system and all the sort of accessories. And the third would be training, because but the customer is talking to a salesperson. So we invest some of our time, even when we are working with, let's say, retailers in China, where we are giving a lot of these kits. So actually we do a lot of business by giving these kind of bespoke collection kits to retailers, especially in China, for example. We have to also do the last line where we have to train their sales staff. So we make short videos on how to talk about the collection. So let's say a collection is inspired by a certain symbol. They're not going to be able to say that story at the retail end just by themselves or just by reading a book. So we send them videos of how to talk about the collection. We have Chinese staff that will sort of create short videos. So I would say content, visual merchandising, and training. To me, alongside the product, would be 3 things that I would put into a kit, and maybe some product guides in terms of how to look at the collection and sort of technical details of the product.
Harshad, you have anything that you?
Yeah, why not? I mean, like I said, you have to sell the story. So if the bot, like Ankit said earlier, if the salesman at the shop, at the point of sale, has the right information about the whole collection and how it should be marketed, it shouldn't just be shipped like manufacturers, like you said. Predominantly, we have a bunch of manufacturers attending our webinar and things like that. We have to take that forward. I mean, again, in the India context, when we went summer and supplying to stores, we were actually creating visual merchandising 15, 20 years ago When we were with Farah, we had point of sale material like you discussed. The point of sale material was specific and very clearly defined to the way the pieces should be displayed, to the way the pieces should be sold, color combinations, material, textures, backgrounds, things like that. And not only that, I mean, today, for example, when I do trunk shows, we also set a mood at the trunk shows which speak about our collection. So it might be posters out there, it might be visual, it's the music, we keep an aroma out there, smell, things like that. You need to appeal to all the senses, and the client has to sort of relate to you, like Zora said earlier. You have to build a connection over there. The brand has to build a connection. Even the manufacturer supplying the story has to in some way create build a collection, build a feeling, build some sort of emotion for the client to be interested in that product.
So, in your experience doing all of this, the whole end-to-end kind of solution, has it actually helped you unlock value in the raw materials that earlier didn't have too much trading value? We in India we have raw material by the ton. Some of it when you try to sell it as a trader, it's not really easy. You kind of, so all of this has, in your experience, given you a much higher return?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. We're using even diamond related. There's so much of reject stuff. I've been using black diamonds for over 20 years now. IC diamonds, we did a whole collection of IC diamonds a few years ago. And IC diamonds is just sort of a reject product over here coming out of manufacturing that someone said it looks milky and it's IC. So it's really just taking it out there. Di Gruzogorno, who did that with black diamonds, took a material that was sort of a waste product, not something that was even of much interest to anybody. And he created a whole line about it, and it goes on and it's still selling. Black diamonds has become a big thing. So not only black diamonds or white diamonds or flat diamonds or coffee diamonds, or it's again the material that you have, create your story with it. We use a lot of black onyx and things like that, material which is not expensive, but we have brilliant cutters in India. We have a whole sort of people who have been trained in cutting material and stone since maybe 500,000 years, and they're so good at it. So amalgamating, putting that material maybe which is not so expensive with material which is expensive, and coming out with a product or a story. Like I have a collection called Gem Opaque, using only opaque material. And this material is not expensive, but the way we look at it, the way we perceive it, the way we cut it into a very three-dimensional sort of shape and merge it with diamonds, gold, things like that, we come out at a very good price point, a good a piece over there, which is a certain sort of size. Especially in India, they're looking at things which they want to see some sort of size. So that's a good way to balance off without using too much of precious material over there.
Ankit, in your opinion, what Harsha just mentioned about unlocking value in things that didn't seem valuable when they were not surrounded with anything else or not set in a particular way. Can you give everyone maybe an example of, tech-enabled companies, not necessarily at every level, but companies that are using all of this, the merchandising, the storytelling, and the tech, and it could be the jewelry industry or any luxury industry that are doing companies that or businesses that are doing a really great job of using all of this and creating great value?
I think our inspiration, we always look up to a lot of the luxury brands, right? Maybe not jewelry luxury brands, but even if you look at brands like Dior or Chanel, Gucci, for example, they do a phenomenal job. And I've had the privilege to meet a few people who tell us about sort of what kind of investments and systems they put in place to enable technology and storytelling. It is a lot of effort goes behind what we just simply see. In terms of data analytics, in terms of using sort of the best of technology on digital, where they're able to sort of map a customer from the store to their house, to the mobile, to when they come on the web, the entire omni-channel experience, for example, or even all of these sort of engaging technologies. So I would say a lot of these brands are at the pinnacle. A lot of jewelry brands are still catching up. There are maybe young jewelry brands, like there's a new startup in America called Mejuri or Orate, who are doing a lot of technological, like presenting completely technology companies, presenting jewelry, allowing personalization and so on and so forth. So at that end, yes, there are a lot of some jewelry examples of companies, but even the luxury brands are investing a lot to bring storytelling and technology together. And you can see from the quality of their content and videos and presentation. And that's why they can sell bags for even at a greater premium than we can sell jewelry, bags or shoes or whatever.
So the best, the best examples of this, let's say the cost of production is $100. In your opinion, what kind of value do they capture at retail? In the sense, how much do you think a $100 product with all this, this entire ecosystem around it, how much do you think it can sell for in a developed market? What is the multiple?
You're saying in the jewelry category, right?
Let's.
So we know for a fact, and I'm sure everybody knows for a fact, that if you look at any of these luxury brands that are still thriving and their sales are still going up, even in the worst of times, are able to sell their product between 500 to, if 100 is the cost, then effectively their end retail price would be anywhere between 500 and 600. Especially in the international market and context where there's a lot of the consumer awareness is there and the people are buying products for their brand value, for the storytelling, for what it means to you. That wave or that culture is not yet introduced in India, or sort of maybe other than Nirav Modi, nobody really, in the time when he was running the business, not including all the other factors, but there was still a lot of success in terms of being able to sell the product at a certain value and premium. Same way, I think a lot of the international brands are doing that, and that wave in India has still not come in a full-fledged way, because people are still, even the consumers are still educated to buy the product as an investment, not as, if we invest in marketing, if we invest in content, we will see that difference, right? And we started as, obviously her story is a young brand, just 1 year old, but we're trying to see if we can follow that approach, put a lot of money into content, into story. I mean, the brand only is her story. So it's obviously got everything to do with storytelling. And we're able to see that, okay, maybe they don't pay the same kind of premium that you get in the international market. You have to adjust to the Indian condition, but when you do a good job of storytelling, they don't ask for what is the breakup. Like, we rarely get a customer who says, can you give me a breakup? So they come in because the entire experience is about the story, about the symbolism, about what the piece means to you. The conversation rarely ever goes down into, well, what is the breakup? Can you give me the per carat price or something like that?
Customer plays into your strategy. I mean, the stories and the merchandising and all the paraphernalia is a distraction. It's kind of diverting the customer's attention from talking about only the breakup, right? They suddenly get immersed in this world that you create, and they might.
I wouldn't say it's a distraction. Maybe is not the word, but maybe it's sort of emotionally enticing them, right? So if you're looking at a piece and it makes you think of your mom, or it brings a little tear in your eye, then you're going to be a lot less susceptible to asking for breakup. So it's what story you tell the customer. If the customer comes in and I say that, okay, I'm the cheapest store in the street, then obviously the conversation will go in one direction. Correct. So it's also, I mean, you have to control that narrative.
Raises the willingness to pay. In some ways, this raises willingness, or at least doesn't start another. So, Zohra, so now it's clear from what Ankit was saying, that there is a huge value kind of that is waiting to be captured for Indian businesses. So we may find a time pretty soon where businesses kind of adapt to this new opportunity, do all of this stuff, but still there continues to be this challenge in India where to protect your IP is not as easy. So, you put in all this effort and someone comes in and kind of, doubles down their investment or kind of puts in more money than you and runs ahead. Now you're, is there a way, or has it become easier to protect your IP in India now? I mean, are there organizations that would enable businesses to kind of in some way at least defend their intellectual property? Or is it still...
I mean, I do think that things have improved over the years in terms of protecting your intellectual property. But I do feel we have a long way to go. I mean, I still know there are a lot of people maybe who might be skeptical about putting something up online or doing something a little earlier because they're worried that, due to whatever copyright laws and things like that, they could skirt around it and create something similar. So while I do feel that it has improved from before, I still feel that there's a long way to go in terms of, like registering patents or trademarks and things like that. It is a longer process. There is,
now.
sorry?
It is an option that's available. I mean, you can...
It is an option, yes. You can do it. You can do it. You can trademark things. You can register designs and things like that. You can register proprietary methods or techniques. But in terms of, coming like to where it may be in Western countries or, internationally, I still feel we do have a long way to go.
Harshad, Ankit, you guys want to come in on this? Should one refrain from or not waste time trying to protect their IP or just because of the process, or you should continue?
No, one shouldn't be scared to put our designs out there. They are going to be copied. Some, I think, just take it as flattery and move on as far as possible. I think I'm not an expert on this, but I've been speaking to a patent lawyer recently, and we had a case, if I may say, last year where one of our brands we had registered, someone tried to copy the trademark, and this was a company in Delhi, and I don't want to name them, and they tried to use the same trademark and things like that, and on Facebook and social media, and we filed a case, and I must say that in 3 months we won the case. We gave all our information, our registration, things like that. So the lawyer told me that India has signed an agreement, an international agreement on patenting and proprietary law around 2 or 3 years ago. And it's become much more easier today to sort of register your product or your trademark or your brand and defend it. And I was discussing with him about design. And if I just want to individually put a product out there and I just want to, it might be a product that I might sell in a certain number. Can I trademark that, and what is the process and things like that? So from what I understand, it's become quite easy right now. Earlier when we did it, we used to do it through Calcutta. It took 3 years, etc., like that. But registering an individual design today, I think what I understood was it costs you not more than 10,000-15,000 rupees. And you can do it in approximately 2 to 3 months. It could be yours to patent. Now, how easy is it to defend? That's another matter. But he says it's coming into play. Like Zora says, things are improving.
Ankit, you wanna? You must have obviously gone down this path with her story.
In terms of brand patenting, brand name, and all of that sort of trademarks and all of that, it's been a little easier. Design is obviously a bit of a struggle. What we've slowly begun to realize is that while we have to do what we have to do and the legal system should help us, eventually marketing is the best way to protect your product. Because if you've marketed it well, and if you, if you've already created that identity, then it's yours, and no amount of patenting helps you protect that. So we've kind of come to terms with the idea that eventually no amount of legal, while we have to do it, but eventually no amount of legalities will really protect us on creative things. We just have to be fast, and we have to take it to the market, and we have to take it to the consumer.
Take it as a compliment if someone copies you, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. One more thing, Milind, I want to add over here. There are other ways to shame somebody who's copying you today. We have social media. We have things like Diet Prada, Diet Sabya. Use them and shame somebody if they're copying you. So there are other ways besides going the legal route.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we'll take some questions because we've got a ton of questions that people are asking. So there's a question, there's a bunch of fashion designers that are now entering the world of jewelry design. And these guys have obviously been great at creating narratives around all their, wares. Like they've really been able to spin fantastic stories and sell, their products at exceptional premiums. Do you think this entry of fashion designers into our business is it a good thing? Do you think it threatens anyone's position in the business, or should we just embrace it and kind of build on this? You want to go first, Ankit?
Yeah, I think it's a very good thing for our industry because it brings an aspect of fashion and design and style into our category, which has kind of lacked it. For long, we've been only about investments and about sort of working with classic silhouettes.
Yeah.
And there is the fashion conversation around even a high jewelry, even if you're selling a 30 lakh necklace, that conversation is not about, how is it fitting you, how well it's looking, how well it's styled. And so it kind of restricts design, right? And for many, many years, our design has been restricted in India because it's just working with one silhouette. The moment there's a fashion dialogue, it opens up the design canvas completely. So I really, really think that it's been a huge step forward. Yes, of course, it will threaten people who are not moving with the times and who are not investing into design and style and all of that. But it equally gives companies that are wanting to do that an opportunity because the consumer narrative is now changing. Today, how many times would you have a girl who brings a picture of a dress into a retailer store and says, now, you know what, help me style this jewelry. For many years, it would be, let's just go buy the jewelry. This is how a family buys it. This is how your grandmom, whatever the family tradition must be. But now the first conversation a retailer is forced to ask is, are you going to wear a Sabyasachi or a Jayanti Reddy? What is the dress? And then the retailer is also now struggling to say, okay, but I have to now make this work. So the entire conversation changes, and I think it opens up the canvas for design. So I think, yeah, it's a really, really good movement.
Laura?
I mean, in my opinion, I think it's all right as well. It's just a strategy or a brand expansion or extension. And international brands have been doing this for some time. You see like so many international brands like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Gucci recently, got into jewelry. And I don't think it's really, affected other high-end brands like Cartier, Bulgari, or any other brands that may fall into the same category. Yes, it just brings about more competition, and it maybe pushes you to be more innovative and figure out your kind of position in the industry and figure out how you can distinguish yourselves from these brands. But if, like I said, if you create a connect with customers, if you create that kind of brand loyalty, even if they are doing something like that, they will still come back to you to create jewelry pieces or buy jewelry from you or whatever it is. So it's just about, it's whether they do it or there's a new jewelry brand that comes into the market. It's just healthy competition, and you can see it as a negative or you can see it as a positive and try to better yourself in the long run.
Harshad?
Well, you can't stop this. It's going to happen. And it's a very sensible thing that companies are doing out there, the international companies, and I'm sure it will spill over here. We're already seeing a lot of Indian designers, fashion designers, tying up, whether it's a Manish Malhotra or a Tarun, either tying up with jewelers or creating their own jewelry lines. So what are they doing? They're trying to tap the same narrative, selling across mediums, whether it's an accessory, whether it's a fashion product, or it's a piece of jewelry. They're selling that whole story with a collection. If you study Hermes and you see their horse collection, so you see it on the belt buckle, the buckle of your belt buckle, you see it on the purse buckle, you see it in earrings, you see it in this thing. So they're sort of selling the story across multiple areas. And I think it's a very bright thing to do, and it's a very sensible thing to do. One, you're tapping the client wants to spread over, and maybe in the past, if they had a fashion piece or a certain 70s inspired Gucci piece of a dress or something like that, they had to go and find a piece of jewelry which had to go with it. Today, that's the brands are selling that whole story under one roof and tapping the client before they step out. So it is very competitive for jewelers and things like that, but reach into it, and there's nothing you can do about it besides learn from them and take it forward to your clientele and your street. On the other side of it, the jewelry brands have also been trying to cross over. You have Bulgari and Cartier doing bags and accessories now since more than 10-15 years. So they are spilling over onto that segment as well. So I think it's just the lines are getting more blurry across mediums and segments. High designers doing Pret lines at H&M, low designers doing high lines, all sorts. It's all getting blurry. I think
you bring an interesting point, because there's another question which someone is asking is, with this CAD CAM and the ability to kind of produce what we were earlier discussing as a advantage, do you think we're overdoing it in terms of giving choice to the customer? Because you're seeing at some levels a backlash against H&M and Zara for kind of
fast fashion,
reducing, pollution and all those things. Do you think we're giving too many choices to the customer and reducing product life and increasing costs in that sense? Like we're just overextending ourselves just to kind of capture the customer. Ankit? Sorry, I think Ankit is...
You want me to go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So this whole thing with fast fashion, what you are referring to with H&M and the backlash against that, the consumer is becoming very, very, very exposed, so to speak, about sustainability, and how all this is affecting us, our planet, and especially the generations you're talking about, whether it's the millennial or the Gen Y, the Gen X. They're very, very, there's so much of information out there. We're seeing it with this Black Lives Matter in the last week. Everyone is involved. Everyone is suddenly becoming an activist, whether they're sitting at home and becoming an activist or they're out on the streets and becoming an activist. So we have to pay attention to that. I mean, luckily jewelry has not gone that fast in seasons as fast fashion has. Every few seasons you have a resort, you have a this, you have the show. A lot of the jewelers themselves, a lot of the fashion people themselves are now turning around to face this information and what the consumer wants. So a lot of the designers are now saying, we'll show twice a year fashion. Instead of doing 5 collections or 6 collections a year, we're going to do it twice a year. And the consumer, for that matter, also says, maybe there's something in value in even a light piece of jewelry, then again, a piece of, a thing which is going to go out of fashion in maybe 3 months or 6 months. So balance out trends with classic, and that could keep you moving forward with the today's times and still be sustainable.
Ankit, I don't know if you got the question because you got.
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah.
My view on that is, I think for sure, giving a lot of consumer choice definitely confuses the customer. But what technology has helped across businesses is the aspect of being able to personalize it. So when you look at exploring CAD CAM, it's not like you have to take that and put 1,000 pieces in your shop when you only need 200. Right. But with those 200, if you can give options to the customer to tailor it to their style, to the kind of colors that they want, CAD CAM and a lot of any other technology can also help do that. So you have to kind of find that balance between how do you help it personalize it and how much do you sort of give in terms of choice. But that's a balance you have to sort of find.
So another question or concern that we have is, as part of the whole merchandising kind of kit, Zohra, the quality of packaging that we get, in India is compared to what you see globally. How have you seen it over the last few years? Has there been progress? Because it's still, still leaves a lot to be kind of, there's still scope for improvement. Is there anything that you are seeing, or any area or any part of the country where you're seeing really good ideas coming out in terms of packaging that people could kind of use for their own businesses?
I think packaging is a really, really important part of presenting a product to a customer or sending it to them, which a lot of people do miss out on. Like you said, yes, in India, we haven't been at par as some other manufacturing centers where, you know, the kind of finish that you expect, the kind of detail that you want on your packaging is not the same. It definitely has improved because there are a lot of new players who've come into the market, maybe on a smaller scale, who are creating interesting packaging, who are trying things in different materials and different mediums. Like, for example, you have people manufacturing tin boxes where you can digitally print on them, or doing various things with different kinds of paper or different kinds of fabrics. So, you know, there's a lot of introduction of new materials, but I still do feel that the packaging needs to evolve in terms of the final presentation, the kind of finesse that you would expect, especially now with brands looking at India and, you know, making more of an international presence. I think the finish is a really important part of it. And packaging, yeah, the quality of like the final finishing of the packaging. And even in terms of, if you just research packaging, or if you see what a lot of international brands are doing, they have innovative boxes, for example, for engagement rings, where, you know, you open it and it pops up, and they do all sorts of different kind of things, which are not the traditional boxes that you see, which you just open and close, but they're trying to do product development or research and development within packaging itself. And I think that's an interesting field and something that should be considered and something that can definitely be developed further in India.
But it
certainly more refined.
has improved.
It has improved, but I mean, we should. Right now, I mean, whether it's a designer or anyone, we should demand that things, you know, have that kind of refinement, have that kind of finesse, because at the end of the day, if you're building such a great narrative, if you're curating your content for your brand and you're marketing your products well, and you're working with so many different materials, the final presentation also makes a big difference.
Ankit, you want to comment on that? Harshal, after that?
In terms of packaging, I think for sure, there's a long way I feel in India we can still go. Even if, like, we have a visual merchandising team of about 7 people that looks at window displays and product presentation and packaging across our different brands. But one of the biggest challenges we have is producing packaging in India, because there is hardly an ecosystem of producing good packaging in India. We have to pretty much get everything from China. And you know, that's not, at the end of the day, it's quite expensive and the mechanisms are very, very difficult to deal with them. So I think there's a long way in India to go. As far as coming up with ideas and design, I think that environment is improving, although it's not anywhere close to where global standards are.
Harsha?
Yeah, so we have obviously been involved with our own visual merchandising for many, many years, from the summer days when we did a collection on the gypsy, and I created a whole wagon for the stall, which was like a gypsy wagon over there and things like that. And people were shocked with things that we're doing. Again, that's 15 years ago. But I agree with both the panelists. We have a great bunch of designers, product guys out over here, but somehow we just can't get that finish. And I have tried importing from China and from Europe in the past. The volumes that these guys need, I mean, it might just not work for us. You need to be really, really large scale. So what I do is I work with the fabricators, I work with the carpenters, and I create our own visual merchandising. I'm getting the story out there since a while, but I'm still not totally happy with the finish. I mean, that sort of sleekness, if you're walking down Fifth Avenue in New York and you pass the windows over there, I remember passing Bottega Veneta one time, and there was a window with macaroons over there, and the bags were kept and the shoes were kept on the macaroons. It was brilliantly done and just so well finished. But I think things are changing over here. If you see the Hermes window at Horniman Circle, they've tied up with a young architect called Rushad Shroff over here. And he's doing some really, really good stuff over here. And so we can work with the right people. I think the window part is still easier to do, and the show windows and things like that. But the packaging itself, we definitely face hurdles. It took me maybe a few years to find the right ribbon manufacturer for my packaging till he could get the printing right. And we went on changing and changing and changing and things like that. So I hope that improves. Design-wise, we have people to visual merchandise over here. The exposure is coming there, but the execution is something that we are still not totally getting, I think.
So we're guys, we're almost out of time. Thanks again to all three of you for kind of sharing valuable information. In summary, all these three aspects combined can actually, it's clearly evident from the success that all of you have had, that it's actually possible to, build exceptional businesses, exceptional product, present them in an exceptional way, and make exceptional margins. Margins continue to be a challenge for our business. Harsha is smiling when I say margin. Tells the story on who's laughing all the way to the bank. But yeah, it's actually possible, and all of us shouldn't give up. And thanks again, guys, for giving time to everyone. If anyone has any closing comments, please go ahead. Starting with Ankit.
Thank you, Milan bhai. I think, like you said, if the power of the three come together, then they can add a lot of value. It's not just about making money. Of course, each one tries to do what best they can. And we're definitely not charging a premium if there are any retailers listening. But I think collectively, from a consumer standpoint, going forward in the times post-COVID and in the times to come, I think if we don't adapt our businesses and go more and more closer to how to connect to the consumer, and all these three combined together will help us do that. And I think we're going to find anybody who does not do that is going to find business difficult 3-5 years down the line. And I think it's going to become the norm 3-5 years down the line. So I think it's better all of us figure out and take our businesses and leverage the power of all these three things together. So thank you again. It was quite fun.
Dora,
Thank you very much for having me as part of this panel. I mean, I really do hope that, we move towards these things, especially because India has so much potential. And I'm not only talking about larger scale businesses, but even individual designers or smaller businesses that are maybe struggling to find a way. Maybe if they take these points into consideration where you build on these three, maybe, it'll help in terms of building a successful brand. You don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. It's just doing it in the right way. So I do hope that it changes and that we see a greater response to the value of design in India.
Close with Harsha.
Again, thank you for having me, Milan. It's always great collaborating with you on these things and fun. I would say for me, design is, and this whole thing, the topic that we spoke about, use design sensibly, appeal to the right audience, study the right audience, whether it's international or local, whether you're a manufacturer over here or a design brand over there. You need to be very clear today to survive. It's not easy to get that margin like we were talking earlier, but we want the margin. If we don't have those margins, we can't survive. So it is a business at the end of the day. So how do we get that those margins? It's being, I think, selling that whole story is one very, very, very important aspect that everyone needs to look into. And maybe not ape the West, but use our own Indianness and to go forward, but use the ideas from the West and to get to that level of retail. We are nowhere near that level of retail and marketing and merchandising. We need to get, we have a long way to go, and there's a lot of young minds out over there, and I hope everyone pitches in their own companies, whether retail or factories and things like that, and push the ideas forward. Thank you.
All right, great. That's awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.